Good morning, everybody. Thank you all for being here. It's great to see such a full room. My name is Molly Silverberg, and I run our humanities programming at BAM, which includes programs that help provide context for and engagement with our productions, along with our literary programming. We are thrilled to be one of the Brooklyn Book Festival's cultural and programming partners, and to have been one over the years, and to see this festival grow. It's really such an extraordinary day of events, and we're just really excited to be a part of it. So for today's discussion, we welcome 4 incredible authors for a conversation about their books, which each pay specific attention to how class, race, sexuality, and nationality change our sense of what a coming out story even is and what might define a coming of age story now. That'll be the starting point for today's conversation, and we'll see where it goes from there. This discussion is presented in conjunction with The End of Eddy, an adaptation of Édouard Louis' autobiographically inspired novel presented as part of the Next Wave 2019 at BAM this November. So in the interest of saving as much time as possible for their conversation, I'm just going to briefly note that today we are honored to be joined by Nicole Dennis-Benn, who is the author of the novels Patsy and Here Comes the Sun, Gerald, who's the author of There Will Be No Miracles Here, T Kira Madden, author of Long Live the Tribe of Fatherless Girls, and our facilitator for today, Alexander Chee, author of the novels Edinburgh and The Queen of the Night, and the essay collection How to Write an Autobiographical Novel. Greenlight Bookstore will be selling books from each of our panelists, and they'll be signing books downstairs following the program. And as you may already know, the Brooklyn Book Festival is packed with events. So immediately following the program, there will be another event in here. So they just ask that you clear the room as quickly as possible following the program. And now I will turn it over to these brilliant 4 individuals. Thank you all for being here.
Thank you so much. Thank you all for sharing your morning with us. I have asked I like to think of this trio as my supergroup this morning. I've asked them all to read a short excerpt to begin. So I think we will just go down the row, and then we will get started with our conversation.
Hi, thank you for coming. What a room. I feel nervous in this room a little bit. I'm going to read an excerpt from Pen America, the Mythologies issue. This excerpt is not in my book, but very book adjacent, and for the sake of time, I think this might be better.
I'll hold this up so you can all.
This is called Before He Died, My Father Took Me to the Olympics. I wanted to be Dominique Moceanu because she was white, and not Dominique Dawes because she was not white, and definitely not Amy Chow because she was me but proud. She was my cuter cousin at the dinner table. She was someone who could move. Growing up, I was called flat, I was called boy, I was called Twinkie Chinky, and I said, I'm gonna be a gymnast someday, because that's what real kids are made of. Myth of girl, myth of body, those diamond-cut tumblers, and I rolled up towels on the floor of our camper and pretended the padded scrolls were balance beams, and I stuck every goddamn landing as my father watched on. Dominique Moceanu, Dominique Dawes, Amy Chow, Shannon Miller, Amanda Borden, J.C. Phelps, Carrie Strug, whose one-footed vault still surprises me 22 years later. How I loved them. In Hawaiian, there is a term for a swollen drop of rain at the tip of a leaf. The eyes when they wobble with shine before any tears fall. It's halo koloko. Crying is a different word entirely. Here's what I can tell you about my father as a person. Everyone who ever met him remembered him. He told long, expansive jokes with questionable accents, and when he told them, the whole room laughed like hell. For 9 years of my adult life, he met me at the movie theater every Saturday morning. He was brilliant. In the summer of 1996, he took me to the Atlanta Olympics to see those gymnasts. He worked until he died, and he was never late. Here's what else about him. He was an addict. He was stubborn and sexist. At times, at the peak of his addictions, he was abusive. He kept secrets, whole siblings, plural, from me. And for several years before he married her, my mother was his mistress. I was another one of his secret children. He taught me how to gamble in Vegas at 5 years old, and the first time I have a drink in a casino, creme de menthe and milk, I am 6, the silky green liquid matching my dress exactly. But let me try again. Let me reach through the years for the facts. Once my father was Bella Caroli. Once he described all the ways I might become a person, a fancier, beautiful woman. I sat on his lap and he said, even though you are not a boy, you will shine, you will cook, you will marry a good man, and you will have the strength of a whole island inside you. I never became a gymnast. I can't even touch my toes. I did propose to a woman at a gas station in Edmond, Oklahoma, Shannon Miller's hometown, on the way to a prairie burn. When we saw that sign, hometown of Shannon Miller, I said, did you know I once wanted to be a gymnast? And she didn't, but my body felt so big inside of that confession, I bought 2 mood rings for 75 cents, kneeled down on the gasoline-kissed concrete and said, marry me. The red of burning is a different word than the red of meat, the red of twilight intervals, the red of a blushing face, the red slant of rain, the red of the newly deceased, ua punoho. I like that one best. But I came to this story for my father. I don't know the beginning and ends of him yet, or the beginning and ends of this astonishing sadness, or why my father makes me want to watch every hour of this Olympics still, because he rented that camper, and we drove all the way to Atlanta, and the bomb shattered off in Centennial Park, and he promised to protect me, promised that our teams would win, carried me tight against his chest when he pretended to be Bella Caroli, and said, you can do it, son, like I could be that kind of person. Carrie Strug, she got the gold. I only know that I was not his son. I only know that after someone dies, no one prepares you for the dreams. I know that my father did have a son after me whom I have never met, though I bet they have the same nose. I've heard that boy grew up to be a musician and never, ever an athlete. Thanks.
Good morning, everyone. So I'm going to read a very short excerpt of my novel, Patsy. It's right in the middle of the novel, and I won't explain. We'll talk about this on the panel as we go further. There's a difference between wanting to die and not wanting to live. Patsy doubts she can explain this to anyone. She's tired of dealing with the dark thing mocking her as a nameless, faceless interloper on foreign soil. Before, it had mocked her as a helpless secretary, trapped inside a cubicle, an unwilling mother, with no way out but inside her dreams. Patsy cannot afford to go back to that either. She wishes to confide this to Fiona, but it would be one less hassle if she can make Fiona go away and leave her alone. So when Fiona tugs the sheet from Patsy, Patsy delivers the blow. I had sex with Alric. A hush falls inside the room when Fiona steps back. As she glances up at Fiona, she sees the vulnerability there, in her eyes, the exposed vein in her neck. All that is preventing Patsy now from pulling the blade with her tongue, telling Fiona how Alric had pressed her up against the wall, right there, where she stands looking down on her, and fucked her good and hard, is the pity she sees on Fiona's face. Patsy expects her to lash out, hit her, tell her to leave, but she doesn't. Then quietly, shamefully, Patsy says, I'm sorry. I'm sorry, guys, sorry. Ooh. All right. God knows how long she has gone without eating. She could die, she knows, though death doesn't seem that scary after all. Not as scary as the dark thing. Here in America, there are no bush teas for it, no bitter mix of ramgoat roses, rosemary, lemongrass, bissy, and other herbs. No pastor to come with a bottle of sanctified olive oil. No neighbor from the country who can wring the neck of a goat and sever it with a machete for you to bathe in its blood. No time to lie down and let it run its course. She's powerless against it. The real hell is allowing this place to eat you alive, Fiona says to Patsy, when she notices that she has been lying in the same spot on the bed inside their studio from sunup till sundown. How many rotations has the sun gone through since Patsy climbed in bed that night after seeing Cicely? She slips in and out of sleep. She wakes to Fiona shaking her. Patsy, Patsy, Patsy. It reminds Patsy of her daughter's voice, how it would pull Patsy from the lips of a deep sleep. Here, she's in the midst of it, hating it, terrified of it, and yet her only thought is of True. During those years, it was the anticipation of going to America to see Cicely that had kept Patsy alive. But what is keeping her alive now? Where will she find the strength that would protect her from the spells? How can she live knowing that she has lost Cicely to her American dream? It's then that what Fiona had said about not having the luxury of choosing love makes sense to Patsy. That's what it all comes down to, choice. When has she ever been given a choice? Never. She has never been given a choice to say no the first time her legs were pried open. Never given a choice to rid her body of the grievance she had to carry for 9 months. Never given a choice to look at another woman and allow herself to be carried by the feeling without blood, bright red on glistening glass, sticking to her like shadow. And now the promise of life comes with accepting the fact that she will never have a choice. That's it.
I was watching the other morning that marvelous clip of Marlon Riggs saying that black men loving black men is the revolutionary act. And of course, anybody who's tried it knows that anybody loving anybody is a revolution or a miracle or a disaster. And at the core of There Will Be No Miracles here is a love story, and so I'll read very shortly from and quickly from that. It all started when he made me wait. Well, some of it started when he sent his first message, sup. I'd kept that message open for a long time, though it didn't take long to read. Kept it open until Joan walked toward my station at the back of the South Oak Cliff computer lab, almost in time to see his message on a dating portal that also sold pornography. I later learned that this was called synergy, a great thing that exists because two lesser things combined. I wish I had known that then. I would have said, River, we could be a synergy, baby, but I didn't know. So there was his short message and his face that resembled my mother's, at least in tone and peculiar beauty, and his eyebrows. Each brow looked like one half of an old ice block tongue made of wool. I wondered if they came naturally like that, if he came naturally like that. I wondered if this is what they called love at first sight, though now I know it was not love. It was just the birth of my want for this boy. Not to lie with him, not to speak with him, but to be the only survivor of a nuclear holocaust with him. No one else would ever see or touch him again, and we'd both have a natural glow forever. It only took a few months of phone calls and chats for this want to grow into, or maybe from, a need to pour myself freely and fully into something or someone, or at least into River. And the need was so great that it was as if I tried to channel all the Big Bang's noise through a single small speaker, through him. This, I understand, is not healthy for a speaker or a teenager, nor did it make much sense. But I figure we all have a person in our lives who takes up more space than good sense would allow, than we ourselves want to allow. So there they are, there he was, in the space beyond reason, where I wanted to be.
Wow. I love you guys. So, when I was asked to present on this, Molly at BAM reached out to me to get my thoughts on this panel and who I would invite. I started remembering back to when I was trying to sell my first novel, and publishers were coming back to my agent with messages like, so it doesn't seem like this is a coming out novel. And it doesn't seem like it's an Asian American novel either. What kind of novel is it? And I was confused by the question, and had to engage with the question, again, for myself, like whether it was a mistake on my part to not include a coming out moment in the novel. And part of it, I think for me, it involved, I don't know that I could have articulated it at the time this way as I can now, the question of who gets to come out? Who gets to have a secret? Some of us, everyone seems to know before we do. And it feels like we're playing catch up to that identity in some ways. So there's that. The other thing that puzzled me when that novel finally emerged was that people started calling it in reviews a coming-of-age story, which it was also not one of those. And it felt like a very strange way of failing to talk about what the book was about. And so this idea for this panel was interesting to me, the way in which the question of like what is a coming of age, what is a coming out. There's been some talk critically in the past 2 decades, I would say, that the coming out novel has become the new coming of age story. I think it imagines a kind of middle class existence for those characters where they have a single test that they overcome, a single challenge, or it imagines a loss of illusions. But I think, for me, I'm more interested in stories about the people who never had the chance to have an illusion, or the people who couldn't hide what they are. So I suppose my first question for my panelists here today is, how have you engaged with the idea of a coming out narrative for your own particular books? Like, did you think about that at all as you were presenting, and if so, how? And whoever wants to start.
I hate this spot because it usually goes like that.
Yeah, that's true.
So this is my first book and also my first work of nonfiction. So it was really different for me in so many ways. I studied fiction, I'd been writing fiction, failed books for many years before this. So I wasn't used to engaging in that kind of conversation of people critically breaking down what my life looks like and what kind of story my life is telling in a text. I think it's interesting that my coming out essay comes towards the end of the book, and people often criticize it, or I've seen reviews of it saying, this says it's a queer book, but it doesn't really get queer till the very end. Why is that? And I think the same could be said for, the final section. The book is in 3 parts. The final part is about Hawaii and about, where I come from and where my family comes from. And the same could be said for that. Like, well, it doesn't get really Hawaiian or Asian American until point X in a narrative. And what I say to friends of mine and the people I love when they're working on personal narratives or fiction is that you're the person writing it, and therefore no matter what you're writing about, that's the lens of the book. That's a queer book. That's a coming of age book. It's whatever it is, however you identify, it's your lens, fiction or not, structure and order or not. And I think I don't think books can be removed from their context if you think about the person writing it and the experiences. I'd like to think that the coming out in my book feels like it did in real life, in that all the cues were there shadowing through my life, and only later can you look back and that moment sort of recolors and restructures the whole thing we've read before, that thing that was there all along. And I also really reject the idea that there is this one coming out moment we're supposed to find through our narratives or in our life. That's a way other people like to tidy our experiences and say, oh, this is the typical hero's journey and the rising action, and here's the moment, and then this person either succeeded or did not. But queer people know that we have to come out every single day. And of course, I'm not the first person to say that, but it's a perpetual coming out, always.
And I'm going to just piggyback off that. I mean, I completely agree. Another thing, too, is language, you know. So for Patsy, and also for Here Comes the Sun as well, I've had, you know, reviews or people, you know, online saying, oh, no, they're lesbians, right? My main protagonist, Margot in Here Comes the Sun, Patsy in Patsy. And one of the things with my characters, I'm writing Jamaican working class women, right? And I mean, I grew up Jamaican working class as well. And for me, like my characters have always felt attraction to women. But there was no label, there was no title. It just was, right? And for these characters, it just is. They're attracted to persons who happen to be the same gender. And I try my best to write around that. So while reading the book, if you notice, well, some of you who have read it, there's no definition. True, who's Patsy's daughter, and Patsy had never defined their sexuality, right? They're defining themselves in a world that's quick to define them. And so what I wanted to do with that conversation is just blur the lines a little bit, because I feel like the language given to these characters are kind of like a Western language, like, oh, you're a lesbian, like wanting to make sense of individuals by putting them in boxes. So I did the same thing with gender identity. I also did the same thing with of course, motherhood, which we're also going to talk about. But for me, it was important for me to have my characters just be, you know, and also the fact that, again, in growing up in Jamaica, I felt like the coming out process, you know, for myself, it was anticlimactic, because, you know, usually when I hear coming out stories, it's like that one moment when you tell the whole world that you're gay. That never happens, especially growing up back home. I was found out, pushed out of the closet. But for my characters, I make sure that even if they do acknowledge that they have the same sex attractions to other people, that I don't overwrite or have them define that for themselves, because there's no language there, especially that they're not in academia, they're not, you know, on college campuses where they have the luxury of finding their identity, right? These are Jamaican working class women and men as well. So for me, that was important to write within that context.
Well, Sadia Hartman just walked in the room. I feel like God has joined us today, not to embarrass her, but whose work, Scenes of Subjection, Lose Your Mother, and Wayward Lives, I think somebody said the other day, oh, every writer's not engaging with Sadia Hartman, and you can't assume that. I said, well, why are they writing if they're not engaging with Sadia Hartman? Whose work changed how I approached this question of writing a coming out story, because I knew before I thought about the position of my work in a queer canon, I knew that I was writing into a tradition that begins with Frederick Douglass. And the tradition of African American personal narrative has always been, and this is why Scenes of Subjection is so important, to make us really grapple with the ethical complications of Frederick Douglass's invocation of Aunt Hester's scream over and over. And what work is that doing? What work is Mr. Douglass asked to do through his personal narrative, not necessarily to show us the inside reality of his life, but to show some aspects of that life in such a spectacular way that people might finally believe enough to stop doing the fucked up stuff they're doing. And early on in the writing, I got a lot of warnings that I should be more like Mr. Douglass. A friend of mine said, what is this? He read a few early chapters. He didn't read any more because I didn't send him anything. But he said, what is this, man? You're writing an autobiography. It's a beginning, middle, and end. It's grounded in the facts of your life. It's written by people on the margins of society who write to assert that they exist. You should go read these books and learn from them. And I was so glad for that conversation, because I knew I didn't want to write that kind of book. I thought about what Kendrick Lamar says on Section 80. He says, I'm not on the outside looking in. I'm not on the inside looking out. I'm in the dead fucking center looking around. That was the position from which I wanted to write. And from that position, coming out is ridiculous. From that position, coming out is only relevant to straight people. From that position, coming out is in many ways a sort of stick-up. It's an ambush. It says, okay, I got you, confess. And I said, fuck that, you see. So I said, the first time you encounter my sort of sexuality is me writing about seeing D'Angelo's Untitled video. And you have to go through 4 pages of me witnessing D'Angelo on the television, and either you get it or you don't.
Oh, gosh.
But I don't know a single person who wakes up in the morning someday and walks into the bathroom and looks in the mirror and says, oh my God, I'm homosexual.
Right.
I mean, it's never happened in the history of the world.
Exactly.
It actually has not happened. So you see somebody, you witness something, and you say, oh, wow,
Right.
I love her, or oh, wow, I want. So I thought that the language and the literature had a responsibility to reflect the raw, strange magic of our actual experiences as queer people, not to perform the dog and pony show that straight people require of us as hostages so often. I wanted my literature, I had done enough of that in real life. I wanted the literature to be a place where I was real with myself more than confessional to straight people.
Good. Very good.
I'm wondering now how so having gone through the coming out story idea, how any of you relate to the idea of a coming of age story, and even have any of you even read any of them? Like, did any of them matter as you were thinking about putting these books together, that tradition?
I'm happy to start on that. I find so much I didn't read growing up. I mean, I was literate, but I didn't start reading until I was 20, almost 23. And it was a great benefit to that in terms of my writing life, because I didn't approach it with the expectations of the deal. And I find this notion of coming of age to be, in some ways, is sort of this, what did Bill Hooks say, white supremacist, capitalist, patriarchal expectation of a linear experience of our lives. The epigraphs in my book go from Revelations to Genesis, because it is, in many ways, like that cry Tony talks about in song, cry that had no bottom and no top, just circles and circles of sorrow. It's not always sorrow, but I think the reality of life is that you don't come of age. I was at a party in Brooklyn last night, and then we were all late 20s, early 30s, and we walked outside, and there was a boy with presumably his friend. They were in an argument, and the boy was a bit more femme, and the friend was, I guess, performing trade for the evening. And the trade figure is yelling at the other boy, and he says, why are you doing this? And you're fucking up. And the boy's like, well, what have I done? And my friend and I are walking out, and he says, you're here acting like a fucking faggot. And my friend and I just stopped in the street, and it was the most heartbreaking thing I've seen in a long time. So this notion of you come of age, and then what? I mean, then you die? I mean, it's like, I think people have a great challenge with the ending of my book, because me and River, we buy a plant, and I'm horrible at plants, and so the plant dies. And after he said, don't worry, it'll be harder to kill it than to keep it alive, and then 2 weeks later I killed it. So it was similar to our relationship, but I'm in therapy, it's okay. But I say, I still don't know what I did wrong, but I will try again someday, promise. That's all I know of coming of age. You keep trying to come, you keep trying.
Right.
You keep living. I mean, so I think in some ways the messiness, we were talking about how to write a memoir. In some ways I think memoir lies to people too much by giving them this sort of, it started, then it's over, ta-da.
Yeah, and just to continue with that conversation too, I'm a fiction writer. I'm not a memoirist yet. But for me, with my fiction, here I gave this woman, Patsy, a story in that she is a 28-year-old woman who's coming of age. I mean, when you think about coming of age story, I usually think, oh, toddler and the evolution of teenage years, and then 20s, and then 30s, and then you die, right? Or not. Or you're a very old person now reflecting back on your past. But Patsy, came of age at the age of 38 years old. Like, here's this woman in her early 20s had a child, right? And I always say motherhood happened to Patsy. She didn't choose it, right? So, this book takes place in Jamaica. So in Jamaica, abortion is illegal, right? So when a woman gets pregnant, there's no way of getting rid of that baby, right? You get arrested, or something happens where you either have to suck it up and be that mother. Patsy did not have that luxury. She actually was going through postpartum depression and ended up saying to herself first that this is not her role. But at the same time, she really was also pushing back against a lot of things, right? She was also growing up in a household with her mother who really kind of negated who she was as a child, right? Her mother was into the church, and she never gave Patsy the time of day, so Patsy came of age feeling that she had nothing to give a child. So she fled to the United States in hope of kind of, yes, you might read on the back of the book, rekindling the relationship with her best friend Cicely, but really at the heart of it, Patsy really wants to escape that role, but also to just find herself, find a place in this world, something that she was never given, right? And so for her now to exist in the United States, yes, as an undocumented immigrant, but most of the book is really about Patsy's self-discovery of who she is as a woman, who she is, as an individual in this society. And I wanted to give myself that challenge to write that coming of age, quote unquote, coming of age story for a grown woman, because I never saw that, I never read that on the page. Alex had asked, what books have you read? Prior to this, I never read a Patsy in my life, a woman who's coming of age into herself as an adult, right? When society expects you to start adulting, right? Which is like, what, age 25 and up, I guess, or 22 and up, whatever, right? So I wanted to explore this for myself, because usually my characters teach me more about humanity, and I live vicariously through them. And so I wanted to at least give them that courage that I probably never would have had, right, to explore this universe, to explore this world, making these decisions, unpopular decisions. Because, I would also say to people, especially people who criticize a character like Patsy, oh my God, you leave your 5-year-old daughter behind, you abandon your child, knowing that, well, listen, Patsy, like Margot in Here Comes the Sun, they're not bad people. They were just placed in bad circumstances, right? So for Patsy, who's a working class Jamaican woman who's uneducated, she never went to college, right? She never had the job. Probability in Jamaica is really hard. What do you do when you're a mother who's trapped in a cubicle, right? Trapped within the religious household of your mother, who's very judgmental, trapped within a society where you can't come out as a lesbian or as a woman who loves another woman, right? Without getting raped or getting abused for it. What do you do then, right? So for me, I wanted Patsy now to break out of that, to dare say, I will do that unpopular thing by walking away, going to another country, yes, blindly, right, not knowing what she would face in another country, but at the same time, ends up kind of finding herself and her worth ultimately. And that's why, I probably would say my book is a coming-of-age story, but as a grown-up coming-of-age story, I would say.
Yeah, I have read many of coming-of-age stories. I studied Russian and British Lit in college, and that form never really worked for me. It didn't resonate with me, and I think, as I was saying before, communities on the margins, I think especially, are expected to follow that traditional linear arc. And with my book, I was really lucky, actually, that my editor, Callie Garnett, she never asked me to make that shape, and I was expecting to have to go through that in this process, because what I handed over was a pile of essays and fragments, and some pieces are one sentence, and some are 30 pages, and then there's a novella with photos, and instead, she said, this seems to be the way you experience your world and your life, and the inner engine of this story, and I want you to lean into that. And it was the greatest gift I could have had. And the end of my book, very purposefully, it ends with the opening pages of the book in a retelling of those opening pages, because I think even though it says coming of age on the jacket of this book, I didn't write that jacket. And if I were to describe this book, it would say our inabilities and failures to make sense of our lives and our past, and the ways we have to rewrite our story every single day, both the mythologies that surround how we've made sense of our lives, the mythologies that other people have put onto our lives, the stories they've made about us, the stories we've made around those in our lives. And I think, I don't know, that's what interests me, is the mini arcs and the mini dips within the same narrative, and how those can clash. At their best, they clash together, rather than building the one great story.
So this leads me to the idea of the coming of age story as being also about disillusionment. What, if any, illusions would you say the narratives that you constructed, what did those illusions consist of? Were there any?
I'll go quickly. I began this, I hadn't planned to be a writer ever, and I started this work simply because I knew something was wrong with me. I had accomplished about everything a kid is supposed to accomplish in this society. Had gone from this little poor, black, queer, damn near orphan down in Texas, and had gone off to Yale and Harvard and done all this stuff. And but despite all of that, or perhaps because of it, I was really cracked up. And I wouldn't necessarily say I was having a nervous breakdown, but I wasn't too far off. And I was awful sad, and a lot of my friends were sad. And so I set out with this book initially just to trace those cracks with words. And not too long after I started, one of my closest friends from Yale, who had also done the sort of Horatio Alger thing, but from St. Louis, committed suicide. And he was the first person with whom I was close who took their life, and I couldn't write for a while. And he came to me in a dream, and I just transcribed the dream in the book to speak of, you know, the tradition. And he was sitting in a booth in a diner, and he leaned back and he said, "You know, Casey, we did a lot of things that we wouldn't advise anybody we love to do." And I woke up and I knew exactly what he meant. I knew that if you look at it from the right angle, a kid picking themselves up by their bootstraps looks just like a suicide. And I thought I had the goods on this American dream crap. And I figured that if I just told it, and told it right, and told it well, and just told what I had seen, that not so much it would lead people to disillusionment, but perhaps it might lead people to healing of the bargain that so many of us have taken of saying, hey, we'll give you the keys to the kingdom, but you have to leave parts of yourself outside. And I saw this book from then on as both a journey to healing for myself and others, but also as an intervention for my friends and other people like them.
All right, illusions. Oh, okay, so sure. Okay. Sure. All right, okay, I'll go. All right, there are various illusions here. You know, if you're talking about, of course, with Patsy, you know, the American dream, kind of unpacking, I mean, what is that? You know, here, you know, Patsy has come to the United States, you know, hoping for better. And, you know, as immigrants, I mean, we all do that, right? Only to come here to realize that, you know, the U.S. is like any other country, you know, having these things, like, for example, racism, you know, and also if you don't have the right documentation, if you're black, if you're brown, all these things that actually could, you know, happen to you in terms of being told that you do not belong. And so for me, it was really unpacking the lies we tell ourselves and the lies we tell each other as immigrants. Because once you get here, there's also the letters and the photographs sent back home, right, from other people saying, oh, we're living a great life now. We have a brownstone family, we have a Mercedes-Benz. And so people back home would look at that saying, oh, wow, so we need to come to America then because life will be great. And so the premise of Patsy, you know, kind of started there, where I wanted to explore the immigrant experience through this lens, where this woman is coming to America with that expectation that she'll now have it all, right? Her friend Cicely sending her these messages, these letters, and she's coming with that expectation. Another thing in terms of illusions that I was trying to unpack with this book as well is the concept of what home is. You know, really, you know, because, you know, we know the true definition of home, right? But, you know, in this situation where you're trying to flee one home because you're not accepted for who you are, you know, if you are growing up working class, you know, poor, right? Or if you're on the margins, let's say you're existing as LGBTQ, let's say you're somebody who is not, you know, accepted, you know, you're claiming a country that doesn't really claim you back, then the first instinct, if you can, is to run, right? And you usually run to countries like the United States, Canada, UK, right? And I'm speaking for like Caribbean immigrants especially as well, and also African immigrants. And then coming here, and then you're realizing that, well, if you're to be existing as a black or a brown person, you're not wanted either. So where is home? And so really realizing, at least my character realizes that home is within herself, right? Finding home is that, that coming, again, I'm going to say it again, that coming of age, or coming to terms with the fact that you're your home, right? And then again, in terms of the illusions of what it means to, of what family means. So while Patsy leaves True back in Jamaica, what ended up happening is that True finds family there, right? She's now being raised by her father, but more than that, she's raised by her community, right? We always think that family looks like, you know, the mother and the father and the child, and a very heteronormative look at how family, you know, look like, right? But then here, you know, I was also, you know, playing around with how community can actually raise a child more than anyone else, more than the parents, the biological parents. And so really those were the, you know, what I was trying to touch on in terms of illusion. And I'm hoping I'm actually answering the question, but those were the things that I wanted to also unpack as well.
Illusion for me, I knew when I started writing this book, or when it started coming together, that it wouldn't be linear, it would be a little messy, it would try to defy classic structure. But I did have the illusion that I understood the point of telling, or I understood who the narrator was. And I thought that narrator was present me, who would then be telling the story of my life. And I realized through writing it that that is not true for the book, and it's also not true for my life. I thought a lot about Beckett's Krapp's Last Tape, if anyone's ever seen that play, in which Krapp, it's the one-person play, he records himself speaking for a future version of himself to listen to on his birthday every year. So on his birthday, he records himself for the future version, and he listens to a version of himself from the past at random. He picks a random age and listens to what was going on in his life that year. And it's the most important play to me because it shows how all the conflict you need is within the different versions of yourself in different timelines. It's the past, present, future version of one person, and that's all the play needs to feel completely tragic. And that's what I wanted to do in this book, and that feels true to my life, because when I think about who's narrating my life, if there's a voiceover to it, it's not me now. It's not this idea of the wiser person who's evolved, who can look back and make sense of things. It's probably my child self who's narrating now, who's helping me make sense of the world through experiences. And maybe sometimes it's my teenage self, unfortunately. But those different versions can narrate at the same time and have conflict within itself, rather than this kind of false idea that we have the ever-evolved person who can look back and tell you what the story is.
And can I say one more thing as well in terms of illusions? Because one thing that's, when I came out to myself as a lesbian and also writing characters who are attracted to same sex was that there was that illusion too that being gay is like a white thing. That you can't be gay as Jamaican. Even when I married my wife in Jamaica, there was that common narrative that, oh, the American turned her gay. And so one thing, growing up on the island, and also coming to America and looking around me on campus, it was mostly the kids who, were white, who, was coming out as LGBTQ. They had their signs, they had the dyed hair, all these things. And I said to myself, I'm not gay then if I don't look like that. And so I kind of write that into my book as well, into Patsy, because I felt like the illusion of what gayness looks like or what queerness looks like did not look like me. What I saw growing up was that women who looked like me were mothers, right? And so that was something that automatically put you in a box already. So to now having this discussion with intersectionality, all these things is great now in 2019, but back then at the start, gay queerness did not look like me, so.
Thank you all. So we have a couple minutes for questions from all of you, if there are any questions. Would anyone like to ask a question for the panelists? Try to direct the question at the group. If we run out of time for questions, you can speak to them at the Green Light Books table outside of this building, where we will be signing books immediately after the panel. Yes.
Downstairs.
Downstairs. Downstairs is where we're signing, yes.
Often we write about identity, we feel this pressure to write on behalf of all people who share our experience. How do you get over the pressure of speaking on behalf of everyone to speak with one voice?
So to repeat the question, in case you didn't hear that, how do you get over the idea that you might, the expectation that you might be speaking for an entire community rather than simply telling your story?
Yeah, I always refer to Chimamanda's the myth of the one story, because even, given that I'm writing, I said earlier on that I write working class Jamaican women and men, but that doesn't mean that I'm the only voice. So I don't really put that pressure on myself to write for an entire population of Jamaicans. Because if all of us were Jamaicans here on this panel, for example, you'd get so many different stories, right? And also, if we were all queer Jamaicans, you'd definitely also get different stories as well. So I don't put that pressure on myself, and I hope it will never be there, but at the same time, I try my best to write the stories that are, that I imagine that's coming off, not that the entire nation of Jamaica on my shoulders. Because once I did that, I won't lie to you and say that there wasn't a point in my life in grad school where I felt, oh my gosh, I need to represent us on the page, because I was like, one of the only persons of color in my MFA programs. Besides Kira, and I think there was one other guy, Dennis. But then having to get rid of that concept and just you know what? No, I'm writing for me. I'm writing for that little girl, that little 10-year-old girl who never saw herself on the page, never heard herself on the page. And once I started doing that, the story started coming. So.
Yeah, I'm not at all interested in being the single voice or the pundit. At best, I want to be part of a chorus. That's all I want. There's that Jean Reese saying that we open all of my classes with, which is all that matters is feeding the lake, and that the trickles and the rivers that feed into that lake don't matter. All that matters is the greater mass of work, and that's really all I'm interested in.
Did you have anything you wanted to add to that?
I think they said it.
Okay.
One more question we have time for. Yes.
So I'm kind of thinking about violence in the context of coming out and coming of age, and also Édouard Louis' book. And I'm just wondering if you guys have any stories of kind of the packaging of that violence, and in making a book and kind of
No, that's
So
good.
I'll just repeat the question quickly for the audience. The question is, what is it like to engage with violence in your stories and the packaging of that for an audience and then going out into the world with it?
I always think of that opening scene of Paris is Burning, and the boy it's a voiceover, and he says, when my father found out I was gay, he said, son, you've already got strikes against you. You're black, you're poor, you're a male. If this is what you're gonna do, you better be really fucking tough. And so I think less so about, I'm less interested in the violence of the world on us, though that is true. What's really thrilling, and I think about this in Édouard's work, and I like it a great deal, because it's a pose that I think you can only get if you've grown up a poor queer person anywhere in the world, which is a sort of inner viciousness that then can go on the page. And it's a cool, I mean, I really love his sentences. Lawrence Stein does a great job of translating them, but he's willing to let the violence come through. Charlie Parker used to say, if you don't live it, it can't come out your horn. I think one of the limits of memoir is how often we've lived these things and we don't let it come out of the horn because we want to play Bach or something, you know. So I think what's really thrilling about being a writer is being able, instead of going and slicing somebody in the face, you can write a sentence. And all that violence can just come out and be very purifying.
Ooh, that's a good question. Well, for me, I've been getting a lot of this lately from Patsy, like, okay, thank you so much for not putting the violence in the book, right? What could have possibly happened to True, who's gender nonconforming, existed in Jamaica? Like, thank goodness she didn't get jumped. I'm like, yeah, I'm glad you like that, but one of the things I try not to do when I'm writing is think about how the world will perceive it, because you have to write with the reality. Like, I don't write fairy tales, so if violence is gonna be something that happens, especially if I'm writing a gay, poor male, working class in Jamaica, that's a given. Especially if he's gonna be existing as an all-boys school, which we have a lot of in Jamaica, it has to happen, because I can't hold back because the Jamaica Tourist Board is gonna be like, you're making American people think we're the most homophobic country in the world. Well, I don't work for the Jamaica Tourist Board, so I will continue writing the truth, and if that happens to come out, it come out. Yeah.
I think that's a great stopping point, I think.
All right. Thank you so much to BAM and Brooklyn Book Fest and to all of you. And to our panelists.